true. So, yeah, Osa and I met last year, I think, in the lead up to the very first City Elixir. We put together a little kind of speaking tour for Bruce to travel around the region and reach out and try to get back to some of the communities that are around and let them know that, hey, we're starting this new thing, and this is the vision, this is what we want to do. Osa was ever so gracious to invite us down to Atlanta and help us try to spread that vision. So we're really happy to have him back this year, and give him a round of warm applause.
Thank you, brother. It's good to be back in Chattanooga. I always tell people, Chattanooga is one of those towns I didn't know existed, and now I'm here and I'm trying to figure out how I can live here.
We can help.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll come live with you, So this talk is called Beyond Functional Programming. My name is Osa Gaius, and let's see, there we go. And I work at a firm called BlackRock, just an investment management firm that's all over the world, and I'm an engineering manager there. So, today what I'm going to try to help you all think about is, my experience kind of getting here is I'm giving a couple of keynotes at a few functional programming conferences, but I don't write functional code anymore. I write Java and Go, or better yet, I build platforms for other teams to, build languages and build tools at work. So, before that, I worked at a place called MailChimp in Atlanta, and so most of the talks I've given about functional programming have been about my experiences working there, interviewing at different places, and thinking about the relationship between functional programming and object-oriented programming. But for the past couple of years, I've spent a lot of my time thinking about the history and the trajectory of functional programming. And more importantly, I've been interested in the Elixir community and our sort of path on that journey. And by extension, of course, thinking about the airline ecosystem. However, I think the open secret, is that for all these years that I've been speaking about functional programming and keynoting functional programming conferences, I have not been a functional programmer, right? And, for me, what was interesting about this is that MailChimp hired me to lead a team of people doing object-oriented programming, and they very much knew that I did not like object-oriented programming, but that was part of why they hired me, right? And now BlackRock has hired me to manage a team leading a bunch of people to build tools in Go. And they also knew, and I was very clear in the interview process, I really do not like any of the languages you use. I will quickly forget them as soon as I get home. But put simply, I'm one of those programmers who writes Elixir in the dark. In the nights and evenings when I'm not too tired to work on my side projects, I write Elixir. And for some time, this caused me a great deal of pain because, I felt this odd sense of coming to these conferences and realizing that aside from being one of the few black speakers, you haven't noticed I'm black, BT dubs. Aside from being one of the few black speakers, I'm also one of the only speakers who, although I've written and deployed massive systems in Elixir, I don't write Elixir, and I can't tell you why you should do Elixir this way or that way anymore, because I don't do it, right? So for me, what's interesting in that is that I'm in between what it means to be functional and what it means to not be functional. And so going between these two worlds, at work being an object-oriented programmer, and at home being a functional programmer, and at conferences like this, it gives me what I refer to as, and more importantly, what Lee Du Bois referred to as double consciousness, right? This idea that you're between two worlds, and that being between those two worlds gives you both, a sense of imposter syndrome, a weirdness, a strangeness, but also a superpower, because you can actually see two worlds. I think Dave, Bruce refers to this as being in the majority and in the minority, right? And for me, this is precisely my experience. Now, today I'm going to explore some of these intersections between the functional programming paradigm that I'm sure we all love and enjoy, and the object-oriented paradigm that, in many ways, I spent the entirety of my life invested financially. So the first section of this talk I'm going to call on Kafka, or a distributed stream. So very often at work, I find myself in a conversation that goes something like this. In this case, I'm going to have a conversation with one of my coworkers who I've, in this case, called Tyrone because I love that name. So it goes, something like this. Yo, Osa, I've got a bunch of stuff that I need to tell another service about from my service, but I don't want to put it in the database. In this case, I respond, dope. Well, why don't you just publish a message that tells the other service, what you want to tell them, and they can subscribe to that message. And Tyrone responds, how can you do that in PHP? And this is me. So I respond, never mind. Let me think about this one, Tyrone. 24 hours later, Tyrone comes to me and says, so Osa, I've spoken to the data engineering team, and they told me about this Kafka thing. I respond, oh, okay, all right, Kafka. He says, yeah, we can publish a message. You mentioned publishing messages yesterday. You can publish a message with Kafka. Also, Airbnb and Pinterest are using this Kafka, so it must be legit. And I'm like, oh, okay, Kafka, okay, all right. Well, I'm in. Kafka, okay. That's pretty cool. Are you sure you need Kafka though? I mean, is there a simpler solution? Tyrone responds, I'm not really sure how it works, but it must be good if Airbnb is using it. And I'm like, word, okay. And then Tyrone finally responds, and he's like, well, I just talked to the operations team, and they're provisioning us a Kafka cluster, and we'll have Kafka implemented by next week. And I just facepalmed pretty hard and closed Slack for a couple of hours. So what troubles me about interactions like this is twofold. First and foremost, as an architect, and I put that in quotations, but I can't quote right now. As an architect and as an engineering manager, I highly dislike telling engineers what to do, right? Rather, I prefer using this sort of Socratic method to help them reason about solutions. However, this approach breaks down when I have a discussion with someone and they utilize what I refer to as the argument from authority. In other words, Airbnb uses it, Facebook uses it, so of course it must be good. So I struggle in these cases because I'm trying not just to help someone make a good decision about what tool to use, but to give them certain principles from which they can begin to reason about whether or not they even need the tool, and if they do need the tool, how to operate that tool in production. So I consider it very concerning when an engineer who doesn't understand the basic principles of distributed systems, like they have no idea what Raft or Paxos mean, but they suggest that we use a distributed streaming platform because Airbnb and Pinterest use it. The second thing that troubles me about these kinds of hype-driven technology adoption patterns is that it misses an opportunity to actually teach or to consider or to reconsider fundamental choices. So in the example above, I attempted to teach Tyrone about PubSub and message passing patterns, but truly I failed, right? Because part of this was my inability to take the time out to be like, hey, before you do the Kafka thing, let's actually talk about what PubSub means, why message passing matters, what is a topic, so on and so forth. More importantly, I realized that Tyrone did not understand inter-process communication or the actor pattern writ large, and I failed to teach him that in this example. Moreover, I think it was a failure of its various ecosystems, in this case, the PHP ecosystem, to have a sane and native solution for inter-node communication, right? So Tyrone actually, in this case, controversially chose the right tool. Kafka was the tool that appeased both me, the cranky architect, and he, or rather in this case, the level-headed operations folks who did not want to have to install Elixir in all their boxes just so Tyrone could pass messages back and forth. So to me, Kafka, in a real sense, is just an Erlang cluster with a little bit of persistence and some nice stuff added to it. It's the equivalent of syntactic sugar in language, in the case of programming languages. But I think that simplifies what Kafka is, and me being cranky and making fun of Kafka isn't the point of this talk. My point is that the fundamental building blocks of the Erlang ecosystem are being implemented elsewhere to great success. And the troubling part is that folks who are using complex ideas like the active pattern, message passing, PubSub, they are not aware of the Erlang ecosystem. Tyrone has no idea what Erlang is. More worryingly is that these folks will never understand the true underpinning of technologies like Kafka. At best, they will encounter these ideas at a late night when their soup of Kafka and other buzzwordy technologies start misbehaving at 2 a.m. and they get woken up by pagerduty. And they'll have no idea what to do. So to be clear, my argument is not that Kafka is bad. Rather, what I admonish us to think about and encourage folks to do is to understand the basic principles of distributed systems before betting your entire business on a Kafka cluster. For instance, in Tyrone's case, he just wanted to tell some other system about 1,000 events that occur daily, right? He did not need a distributed streaming platform to process billions of events in near real time. However, that's what he got. And I think in the Erlang ecosystem, we, myself included, take the ability to solve this problem, right? Tell another box in your cluster about something that happened. We take that for granted because we just pass a message to another pin. We don't really care. We can even do that across nodes. It doesn't matter to us. It's a simple problem. However, in other ecosystems, folks don't have a simple solution. Therefore, they choose the easy solution, i.e. Kafka, right? But that choice introduces untold complexities that I'm convinced we do not yet know the effects of. And here I'm sort of hearkening to Rishiki's idea of simple versus easy, right? It's an easy solution in Kafka. It isn't a simple solution, but it's the only one you really have if you're not in the world of the Erlang ecosystem or systems like that. So this next section is called On Kubernetes or OTP 2.0. So I've got to be honest, I get really cranky when I hear the term service mesh. It strikes me as one of those terms that gets invoked in meetings when someone wants to sound really, really smart. The best definition I've found for service mesh, which is actually hard to find a definition for something that everyone seems to love to say, is as such. It says, a service mesh is a configurable, low-latency infrastructure layer designed to handle a high volume of network-based inter-process communication among services. Okay, all right. It sounds a lot like OTP, but no, it's not. So the following passage from the Erlang reference actually illustrates this point perfectly. It says, quote, a distributed Erlang system consists of a number of Erlang runtime systems communicating with each other. Each runtime system is called a node. Message passing between processes at different nodes, as well as links and monitors, are transparent when pins are used. So in other words, a distributed Erlang system comes with the basic primitives for doing a high volume of, quote, network-based inter-process communication with low latency. And I have experience running such systems, and I'm sure most of you have as well. But I think what's interesting is when people talk about a service mesh, whether it's like a basic Istio or sidecar pattern or any of these sort of buzzwordy things, what they're really saying is, like, I always want to talk across nodes, right? But they don't have a language to describe inter-process communication across nodes. So instead, we have Kubernetes and like these seemingly interesting things, but very, very simple things. So to be fair, what's happening in the Kubernetes space is it's very cool. In particular, it excites me because it allows us to move away from reasoning about VMs and even reasoning about containers to thinking about processes or services, and we can just communicate with these things as simply processes we want to pass messages to. The widespread adoption of gRPC as a communication protocol, I think, further accelerates our move to a world in which programmers focus on building services that just talk to each other. However, while Kubernetes, is great, and I love Kelsey Hightower because he's also black, it's not that interesting, and it doesn't actually help us reason with the very hard concepts that I think Erlang has been trying to help us understand for decades. For instance, and these questions are interesting because I often ask them in architecture meetings with other architects, and they get very, very confused. How do we deal with the failure of several pods? How do we deal with the failure of an entire Kubernetes cluster? And I often get this blank stare, like, what are you talking about? Like, just start another pod. I'm like, I think we can start other pods, but how do we deal with the failure of the pod, right? What's the strategy for restarting the pods? And I think in many of these conversations, what I realize is that Erlang has always been about administrating massively distributed systems and lots of processes talking to each other. And Kubernetes, while fascinating, doesn't help people who do not understand how to operate systems at scale. It doesn't help them actually learn to operate systems at scale, right? It simply gives you a kubectl command that you can use to restart your cluster. That is not the same thing as operating systems. Now, the feeling I get is that everyone is just reinventing distributed Erlang. And on Mondays, it makes me very sad. On Wednesday, it makes me kind of cranky because meetings are starting to get weird. And by Friday, I'm just smiling, because I mentioned this sort of in a funny way, but I often see meetings with architects and managers, and I'm baffled by their sort of pervasive desire, right, to shout out the names of random Apache projects that no actual DevOps person would ever want to operate in production. Right? The people who actually have to wake up at 2 a.m. do not want you to use Kafka, right? But yet, still, you do. This is because the folks I'm talking to, right, who don't know about Erlang and think Erlang is weird, they've never actually operated systems at scale in production, right? And they're influenced by the legacy of functional programming, but they don't know it, right? They hear words like message passing, and they're like, well, message passing, Kafka. I'm like, no, that's not what I mean by message passing. But this is because there is no sort of understanding of these things. But my grandmother, rest in peace, would often say, Osa Gaius, which is what she calls me, you must forgive them, for they know not what they do. I'm like, come on, Grandma. Just let me talk to them for a second. So, I sort of thought about this because I've given a few talks like this where I make fun of Java programmers for like an hour. And I call it a keynote. So why not? Isn't that what a keynote's supposed to be? Bruce, you still haven't told me what a keynote's supposed to be. I just make fun of Java programmers. But the truth is, as I look back at this experience, I think I'm not frustrated by the folks out there. I strongly believe that we are the ones to blame, right? Because in the current zeitgeist of distributed systems, right, the current sort of popularity of distributed systems, I think it's our responsibility to educate each other's, particularly those who don't know what we do know. It's our responsibility to take the time to teach our coworkers and friends who are Java programmers what functional programming is, what the basic ideas of concurrency, parallelism, and message passing mean, right? The example I like to give that happened recently, my sister came and stayed with me for the summer. And she just finished college. She's looking for a job. She's a single mom, and she went through college learning Java, right? So she comes to my place for a month, and in my mind, I'm like, maybe I should teach her Elixir, because it'd be great. We could program Elixir together. What better thing? But then I realized, she's looking for a job, and she's a single mom. And she needs to find a job really, really quickly, because my niece is an expensive child. But the truth is, she's probably better off looking for a Java job. Right? The probabilities are she can much more easily find a Java job as a new grad from college than she can find an Elixir job. Right? And this is what I think it means to move beyond functional programming. Because I argue that functional programming, as we think of it, will actually disappear as it gets absorbed by the mainstream. And what I mean by this is you think of the introductions of things like streams and concurrency primitives in Java 8. I think this is evidence of this kind of absorption, right? These object-oriented languages are beginning to just take ideas from our communities and build them into their own languages. I think they're being forced to because they have no choice, because their languages are woefully inadequate in many ways. But I think in 20 years, Java will look more like Elixir and Clojure than Elixir and Clojure themselves. And for me, this isn't the problem, right? In fact, this is an opportunity to continue to pressure and educate the mainstream languages about great programming ideas and techniques that they've forgotten now. It's an opportunity for people like my sister who are looking for new jobs to be exposed to the ideas that I want her to understand, even if she is never exposed to the language that I enjoy programming in. The majority of programmers in the world will never use Elixir. No matter how many conference talks I give, how many flights I take to Europe to speak, they will never use Elixir. They will write Java code for 40 hours a week, 365 days a year, until they quit working. And they will send money back to their family in Mumbai or their families in Lagos, Nigeria. They will raise families that are happy. They will be happy people, but they will never know the joy of Clojure or the joy of Elixir. So my question to you then is, what is your responsibility? What is our responsibility to those folks who will never use Elixir, right? Because I can afford to come to a conference like this. That's a great deal of privilege. I can program Elixir at night because I don't have any responsibilities as a single man. But what is my responsibility to the folks who will never write Elixir? And I submit to you that our responsibility is to teach and encourage them to learn the basic ideas of functional programming, which I think is just programming, even if they never do functional programming or Elixir. And if we do this, I think we'll continue to witness what we're currently witnessing, which is the infection of the existing paradigm, right, the mainstream, with the ideas that come from the functional paradigm. And to me, that's what it means to go beyond functional programming, and that's what it means to have a future worth coding. Thank you.